3D is one of those very exciting features that a lot of people ask me about. We're going to start by creating some 3D text. As a side note, I created this space-looking background by running on a black background, filter, render, and lens flare several times. But to create 3D type, we'll start with the Type tool, and I'm going to use white as my foreground color. We'll leave it as Myriad Pro because 3D often looks best in a big sans serif font, and we'll give it some weight like bold or extra bold or semi-bold so it stands out more. And I'm going to type in a huge font size, 400 points, and press Return or Enter to accept it. I'll click once anywhere on the background and hit Caps Lock and type the word light. Now, instead of trying to move this and center it now, I'm going to have Photoshop automatically center it for me. To do that, I'll go to my Move tool and hold down Shift and select both the light layer and the background layer. On the Options bar across the top, I can align the vertical centers and then align the horizontal centers, so it's perfectly centered. Now, to make my text 3D, I'm going to click once on the light layer and choose from my 3D menu, New 3D Extrusion from Selected Layer. This won't show up if you have both layers selected. And Photoshop is saying, you're about to create a 3D layer. Would you like to switch to the 3D workspace? Why, yes, I would. I will warn you that if you don't have an extended video card or a video card with extra video RAM, memory dedicated to video processing, you won't see the 3D menu or it will be grayed out. It takes a minimum of 512 megs of VRAM in order to create 3D objects from scratch in Photoshop. And a lot of 3D work is actually imported. You can create a new 3D layer from a file that originates in another 3D application. Photoshop supports many different 3D formats. U3D, which is a universal standard for 3D, 3ds for 3D Studio Max, objectfiles.obj for Alias Wavefront, Kaleida, Google Earth. You can even download Google Earth and turn them into 3D objects, and they now have support for Flash 3D. So Photoshop will create predefined 3D shapes or give depth to text making it look 3D, but it's not really intended to create 3D characters or 3D cars or really complex objects like furniture, tables, and chairs. Those are better done in 3D applications which were designed for 3D from the ground up, and that's their focus. Now, over here on the left, we have a little view window which shows us our camera view. So I could choose to see the back of the word, or the front of the word, or left, right, top, and bottom. I believe it defaults when I select the infinite light. It brought up the 3D settings that are used on this object, and light is automatic in Photoshop CC. It's very interesting. Once you select the infinite light source and you see this larger circle with a line and a smaller circle, the smaller circle can be pulled in different directions to control where the light's coming from, and that affects your shadows on the object. To get back to the object itself, I'm going to select the word light in the 3D panel. And there are 3 arrows that let you manipulate this in different ways. In fact, on the Move tool in Photoshop, there are several different ways to move an object. Rotate, roll, which has to do with camera, slide, and scale. But I'm on drag, which if I drag, I can move on the y-axis. Taller or shorter. I'm skipping the middle for the moment. The red arrow will move left or right on the x-axis, or scale wider on the x-axis. But I skipped the in-between. The z-axis is really the stacking order, and this lets me rotate around the z-axis. I missed rotate on this one by a hair. So you'll see move, rotate. There we go. So for some interesting lighting effects. And then once I've rotated on the z-axis, so move on x, move on y, scale on y, scale on x, and these two intersect. See that yellow circle going between them? Rotate on y, but really z is the overall stacking order if objects are closer to you or further away. And then you'll see the blue is move on the z-axis. Bring it closer to you or further away. And if I rotate it a little bit more, and I have to make sure I see the right icon, if it ever gets deselected, I can simply click the word light and it brings it back. And let's rotate a little bit more. There we go. Now you can see a bit more of this blue, which lets me rotate around the x-axis, so it's flipping up or down or upside down, and move along the z-axis, and scale along the z-axis, which is affecting the depth. I'm going to drag this back a bit so it's pointing towards me, or I could come back to coordinates. I'm on the light, which you could see as type, and the last icon in properties is coordinates. So in coordinates, I can reset it and it starts over. I love that. I use it so often. In fact, if you're fighting these little arrows, you can just use position for X, Y, and Z, rotate for X, Y, and Z, and scale for X, Y, and Z. And I do often find those a lot easier working by the numbers. There we go. All right, I like this slightly angled. I will move it up along the Y. And now we'll take a look at the last few settings. So for your type itself, it has shadows, which are casting, and it has shape presets. You could choose this inflate preset to give it more of a bubbly look. You could choose pillow inflate, and the bottom ones get pretty crazy. They can spin around the top and the bottom, and once you see the spinning, to rotate those on different axes will be really wild. Forward and back, let's try this rotate. There we go, seeing a little bit of what's happening. But I'm going to go back to the default shape preset. If I scroll up, it is the first one, which is your standard extrude, and back to coordinates, and reset the coordinates. So I do that quite often when I'm experimenting. All right. Now for the last two, you have your mesh, which we were looking at, and you can adjust the extrusion depth. You can change your text color. You can edit the source, which would let you change the word light to the word bright or any other word you'd like. Here I can change or deform the text, and again there are shape presets, but you can play with the taper, which really has a neat special effect. You can play with the twist, which is how they got some of those presets to begin with. And I'll put that back at 0 and hit tab so it's not twisting, and play with the extrusion depth. We're going to finish this off by putting a texture inside the word light. So to get to textures, I'm going to filter by meshes, and the mesh is what it's applying to the image. I'm going to filter by materials. Materials are what will allow you to put a texture inside the word light. So when I filter by materials, for the diffuse material, I'm going to click the folder icon and load water as a texture. So I will choose Load Texture. And I will select the water TIFF. And now I've got a sparkle of water inside the light. So I hope you've enjoyed our tour of modifying 3D objects. Practice a bit with each of these arrows to learn what they do. Experiment with each of the settings in Properties and see what you can come up with for your own 3D shape.